saying, this class will absolutely 100% not cover everything. I know there are a lot of people who know a lot more than I. And that's not, this class is a step back from that. This is the, to demystify the terms that are used, the composers that were popular, and the musical styles of pre-Renaissance music. So we're going to be going up to 1399. And we're going to ideally be focusing on music that is popular in the SEA, music that is sung, that is period, that is documented, and how do we take the music from what we understand when we don't have recordings of what they sounded like, how do we turn that into what we perform today? So, as I said, I'm not covering everything. I'm only hitting a really specific part of Western European history. There is so much more music out there, and I encourage you to explore it. This is part one, because eventually I will have a part two, which will be Renaissance music of Europe, and then as my interests expand, there will just be more. So this is a continuing series, and I'm so thankful and so gracious to all of you for joining me on this magical adventure today. Write things, take notes, ask questions. If you don't have pencils, I have lots. This is a space of learning. There is no such thing as with a dumb question. There's no such thing, as a stupid question. This is a place where everybody is welcome to learn things. And if I can't answer the question, I will find someone who can. So, starting at the beginning, you want to sing like a Viking. The quote I have at the top is, "Unless sounds are held by the memory of man, they perish because they cannot be written down." Saint Isidorius was a 7th century civilian. He was a lord that was then sainted later. He was one of the first ones to really write down any sort of music notation at all. He was the one that kind of first started with the rules of how do you take music that we have been learning orally for hundreds of years with these church chants, how do we get that onto paper so that way people can learn them without taking 10 years to learn everything? Unfortunately, before him, we don't have much of anything at all. So we have to get creative as to how we find the melodies that were used in those time periods, which is why, so we have the records in terms of music. There were definitely skalds and jesters. There were performers. We have the poems that they say they sang. And we have the instruments and the depictions and fragments of instruments of what are left. And so with all of this information, we can kind of piece together what that music would have sounded like. And on my handout, I break the early instruments into strings and horns and flutes. I don't talk too much about percussion because I am not a percussionist, and so I am not confident enough to say more about that. However, there are tons of absolutely brilliant percussionists here in the SEA. And also, since I'm focusing on instrumental music, percussion is kind of its own separate magical beast. So the lyre is a predecessor to the harp. You have your frame, you have your several strings on it, and they have specific notes that they play. You didn't really get more than 6 or 7 at all, so you had a very limited amount of notes. You had a very limited amount of material to work with. They were either played, individual strings were plucked, or you would mute certain strings and then pluck the other ones to create what we would think of as chords in the modern, in our vocabulary. And it's difficult to pin down harp history, and I'm sure Mrs. Lynette could, if you're interested in harps, she is an incredible resource. That's cool. But there are mentions and images of triangular harps in what we think of as the modern day harps. As early as the 8th century.
I got quoted for a reason.
But it's difficult to pin down because it was called a whole bunch of different things and people were vague. Oh, well, this thing is a harp and this is a different name for a harp, but it was the same instrument, and this was called a harp, but it wasn't a harp at all. And so we have a lot of conflicting opinions and papers as to what exactly a harp was. But from what we understand, it was wood and strings, and you had notes, and you could work with that. And then we come to the horns, which is personally my favorite. I started as a brass player and then exploded into everything else. And like most lipas instruments, they're limited to, here it is. The note. You're limited to a certain amount of notes. When you hear herald trumpets, you ba-dum, da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. If you're really good, you can kind of keep going up past that, but you know. That's all you get. So these instruments were meant for war. They were meant for battle. They were meant for striking fear into the heart of your enemies 1,000 yards away. And some of the most famous examples are the lore which comes to us from the Viking era. It was a wooden trumpet that stretched similar to what we think of as like a herald's trumpet. If you come to opening ceremonies this evening, I will have one and you will hear it hopefully strike fear into the heart of the mid-realm. No offense, I know we're not at war quite yet. And the Bachhorn, the Buchhorn, which is down here, is the goat horn equivalent, so it would be smaller. And the Carynx, which is, if you look on your page, the weird boar's head one that snakes down like this. This was the Celtic horn that is found in they found it in the bogs. And from what we can gather, they were held up like this, and you played them, and the boar at the top, it had a tongue in it, and it would waggle, and it's so loud, and you can hear it. You can hear it from miles. Probably could hear it from miles away. When that was the only thing that there was in the mists of the morning before your battle, to strike fear into the hearts of your enemies. And then the instruments that are much softer and much nicer are the flutes. There's several different kinds, and the two that I found really from this period that we have actual records for are down at the bottom. There were little bone flutes, which I can show you an example of what they kind of look like. Kind of look a little bit like this. This is a tabor pipe. However, you can see on the blown flute, the illustration, that you have your one hole up here, and then you have two holes down here. And that's how, by using a combination of different notes, different fingerings with your hands, and how fast you are blowing the air through the instrument, that's how you would get your notes. Similar in this, that how fast the air is going compares to the horns, which is that's how you get air. That's how you get sound to come out of the instrument at all. So, what do you do when your instruments are limited to a really specific range? You work with what you have. And so now we're going to talk about modes. Because those are the combination of 7 notes that, when you play them in different orders, you get different feelings. They're not scales, really. Scales were a much later invention. That was when we had codified, these are what notes are, these are what frequencies are, and when you start getting to Renaissance and Baroque theory, which is, we are not covering these scales. So back at this point, you had modes. So the table that I have here, it says the musical notes were, if you were to play these notes on the piano, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, that sounds like your regular major scale, what we think of to our modern ears. Then that was called the Ionian mode, because that was the first mode, nothing changed. And I also have the solfege written as well. If you're familiar with solfege, this is another way to read notes by, instead of working with the note names, you're working with the note intervals. And note intervals are really what's important when you're talking about medieval music, because that's what the modes are based off of. The combination of do to re is a whole step as opposed to mi to fa. Do, re, mi, fa. Now there's a bigger distance between the first notes and the second notes. The combination of whole steps and half steps are what make the different modes. My jazz teacher taught me if you want to figure out what mode you're in, where's your mi? And that's going to give that mi fa and ti do is going to tell you what mode you're in. There are excellent, wonderful classes that spend an entire hour talking about modes. You could spend an entire year learning about medieval modes. I just kind of wanted to give you a little brief introduction that this is what we call them in modern day, and this is how the different combinations of notes work.